There have been dozens of books written about Nelson Mandela. So why did you decide you needed to write one, and what do you think makes this one different?
I was asked to write a short, concise, readable book, because there are some magnificent books on Madiba, including his own Long Walk to Freedom, and great biographies like Anthony Sampson's one, but they're all around 800 pages. And I was asked to do a book that you could read on a long train journey or a plane journey or lying on the beach, or, if you have a sort of period to do so, rather than ploughing through it. And the main thing is to make it readable, because I think Nelson Mandela's story, particularly to a younger generation in South Africa today, is not known as much as it should be, because the country is where it is, free and non-racial, because of what he did and because of his comrades and the struggle of the African National Congress.
And this is not a textbook. Like you said, it's not that long, because you also have your own personal experiences with him. Just tell me a little bit more about that and how that feeds into the book.
Well, my personal links go back to my mother and father, Adelaide and Walter Hain, who were very active in Pretoria against apartheid in the late 1950s, early 60s. And they were both jailed and issued with banning orders, and then forced, when they stopped my dad working, to come into exile in Britain in 1966, when I was 16. And my mother first went to Nelson Mandela's trial in Pretoria in 1962, 3, when she was the only white person in the public gallery reserved for whites. The gallery reserved for blacks was absolutely packed. And she used to salute him when he came into the dock, and he'd turn and salute her, as he did to the black spectators. So that link goes back there. And they used to also, during the treason trial in the late 1950s, also in Pretoria, take, with others, lunch for the treason trialists, and first met Mandela there in 1958.
So, as you said, politics and activism really is in your blood, because, I mean, your parents were activists, but you yourself, you're an activist. And you start off the book with a quote from Mandela, and it says, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, it is what difference we have made to the lives of others." And it feels like you've also tried to do that. I mean, you've become an activist in the truest sense of the word.
Well, I started off being an anti-apartheid activist, supporting my parents as a teenager in Pretoria, and then a few years later, in 1969-70, leading a campaign as a 19-year-old to stop the 1970 cricket tour, the all-white cricket tour from South Africa. And before that, the Springbok rugby tour we demonstrated against. I came up with the idea of invading the pitch at Twickenham and all the great stadia in Britain, and we physically disrupted the tour. And we threatened to do that to the cricket tour in 1970, led by Ali Bacher and many greats of South African cricket, Graham Pollock, who was actually my personal hero. And it stopped the tour. It never happened. And white South Africa never toured again until Nelson Mandela came out of prison, the transformation process started. So yes, activism has been in my life and in my DNA in a way, and that quote from Nelson Mandela about making a difference, in a minor way, I've tried to kind of apply that to myself, because I think it's a really important quote about life in general, whoever you are, that you shouldn't just think of yourself, you should try and make a difference to improve the lives of others.
This is a young man who, when the whole world was inclined to support apartheid, initiated a powerful anti-apartheid movement in Britain. And NGOs, civil society, and governments eventually joined. But for the first he had to be alone. And that is why we respect him so much. And that is why I was happy to meet him.
You're a British politician, but I mean, you're still very much involved in what's happening in South Africa. I mean, you've been very vocal about corruption in South Africa, particularly, for example, as it relates to the Gupta family, as it related to their PR agency, Bell Pottinger. You've spoken about it in the British Parliament, and you've previously mentioned that, I mean, though there's been progress in those areas, it's not over. What role do you see yourself still playing in this going forward? I mean, do we have any more information about the money that's flowed out of South Africa into the UK or via the UK?
Well, I was asked to do something that brave investigative journalists and activists here in South Africa were not able to do. I was asked by senior ANC figures opposed to President Zuma and all the corruption and the state capture and the cronyism and so on, to try and expose to a wider audience in Britain the absolutely scandalous role of global companies like Bell Pottinger and others. And so I was given information by whistleblowers, some of them brave whistleblowers, inside the state system and outside, to expose all of this. And if I'm asked to do that again, even though President Zuma's left office and the Guptas are fugitives, and we have a president now in South Africa that I'm proud to support, who is determined to drive out corruption, President Ramaphosa, it may be that that role is over, but I'll continue to pursue it if people want me to do it. And the authorities I've requested, both in respect of banking and in respect of the law firm Hogan Lovells, who are all involved in this, are still being investigated in Britain by the authorities. So we'll see what transpires from those investigations.
I saw somewhere that some people have nicknamed you Hain the Pain, because you keep bringing up these issues. You're very dogged in bringing up these types of things. You've been quite savagely attacked for, I think, some of the activism that you've been involved in. How do you deal with that as a person, especially now we're living in this era of trolling and just being completely vicious?
Well, whenever you do something, especially controversial, like well before, decades before social media or even mobile phones, when I led the anti-apartheid campaign, I was viciously attacked. And indeed, the South African security police sent me a letter bomb of the kind that assassinated a lot of activists around the world. Ruth First, wife of Joe Slovo and herself an anti-apartheid leader, was murdered in Maputo in Mozambique. Fortunately, it didn't go off. So yeah, I've had attacks, and today I get social media attacks from all sorts of people. Racists in Britain, or all sorts of people here, particularly who supported the Guptas and the Zumas, attacked me. But, you know, if you believe in what you're doing, and if what you're doing is you believe is on the side of Nelson Mandela's values of justice and human rights and integrity in politics, then you've just got to accept that that comes with the territory.
To get back to the book, it's not just about Mandela's life. You do also take a critical look at the ANC and how it's done. So, in your opinion, now, looking over the last 24 years and where we are now, what are you thinking?
Well, I think the ANC has achieved great things. And millions have had housing and running water and electricity brought to them. And you know, over 400,000 black students are at universities that they would never been at under apartheid. So it's achieved great things. But it lost its way, especially under President Zuma. And I think if Cyril Ramaphosa hadn't been elected to take over, I think the ANC would have been defeated at the next general election in 2019. It had been corrupted from the top right the way through. And unless it reclaims Nelson Mandela's values, which Cyril Ramaphosa has pledged to do, and I salute him for that, the ANC will not fulfill its historic role. And that's what it needs to do. So the final chapter of my book is Legacy Betrayed ? Now, I think there have been enormous achievements, but the legacy was betrayed under President Zuma. And there's still the cancer of corruption and cronyism still infects the whole organization and also the whole of South African politics and government from top to bottom. So there's a lot of work to do. And I want to see those Mandela values of, as I say, justice and integrity in politics. I mean, he was a supreme example of somebody who was selfless, really, after he came out. He took a cut, he donated part of his salary to his children's charity, and he behaved in a way that I think was a moral example to everybody. And I wish today's South African politicians, especially under its new president, would remember those values, as all of us should do. I mean, I have an election poster, Mandela for President, hanging up in my office in the House of Lords, as I did throughout my time in British government. I was 12 years a government minister, and in my MP's office, to try and keep an eye on what I'm doing to make sure it reflects those values. Because they're values that are timeless. His legacy and his vision should apply across the world, and his courage and his selflessness as well.